go ahead and take it away. So thanks, Clemens, for joining us today and leading our Ethereum workshop.
Welcome and happy to be here. So my name is Clemens Wan. I'm a solution architect with Consensus, and today I'm going to go through general tactical hackathon workshop tips and tricks and go through different use cases that I've seen, give you a bunch of resources. I can share this deck with you on the Discord channel. I'll just open it for anyone to view, and you can look through that. Just at a high level, my background is I'm a solution architect. I spent almost 4 years at Consensus building DeFi-based applications, moving into NFTs and DAOs since they're trending now. Before that, I was with R3 for 2.5 years. I was leading a bunch of consortium work, so worked with the 78 or so financial institutions, helped them build out their use cases, eventually helped build out core and core enterprise types of features. I came from Credit Suisse for 6 years, so my background's in finance, trading, and a lot of software development. In that time, I started a blockchain working group at Credit Suisse back in 2014, 2015, and helped build out a few applications there. And I have a bachelor's and master's from Cooper Union. I studied electrical engineering, did a bunch of AI research overseas, and continue to do fun stuff today. So love traveling. And for today, the main goal for the tech folks is to get comfortable with your setup, give you examples of dApps, places to get resources. And then for the non-tech folks, give you inspirations for hackathons, go through different enterprise use case examples if you're interested in that. And then go through different DeFi or NFT type of inspirations that I've seen. So let's get started. Just for those who don't know, Ethereum is, or Consensus is a leading Ethereum software company. We were co-founded by one of the co-founders of Ethereum, Joseph Lubin. And we have major products that everyone uses, a lot of household names such as MetaMask, which has 30 million monthly active users right now. A lot of exponential growth with that. We also have Infura, which has 400,000 developers using kind of our managed infrastructure. We have acquired JP Morgan's Quorum about 2 years ago. So that is something that we provide for enterprise networks. We have a bunch of modules under Codify, which I can share and you can get demos to and kind of early access to if you're interested. There's also Truffle. So for those who develop on Solidity, use Truffle mostly for smart contract management and any type of deployment. We also have a diligence team that helps with any type of review for major smart contracts before they're released. We've done diligence for Uniswap contracts and other things. So a comprehensive team of now over 600. I think we grew by 300 people in the past 1.5 years. So super exciting. And MetaMask is currently making us a lot of money because it has a swaps functionality. And so with swaps, I believe we make around 20 million per month. So a lot of fun things that are being built, and happy to talk more about Consensus afterwards, but let's talk about Ethereum. So in terms of key takeaways, I'll share the deck. There is a hackathon survival guide that you can read through. I just attended ETH Denver this 2 weeks ago, I believe, and there were 30 top hackathon finalists that you can actually view their code and view the presentations that they've done. So it's always good to get inspiration from that. I'm on your Discord, but you can also join our Discord that's linked over here. For those who are non-technical, I've also worked with Austin Griffith in the past, talking with him about eth.build and how we can work together to make a drag and drop interface much more interesting and connect it to kind of the visualization of all of these smart contract code out there. There's also different ways to get started with scaffold.eth, and I'll have different slides on this. So let's get started. So the 30 minutes are probably going to be split up into these 4 sections. I'll probably go for 2 hours. Happy to take questions, happy to slow down, speed up as needed, but feel free to ask questions in the chat and I will answer them. Great. So the first section is just why Ethereum and not any other blockchain, public network out there. We do a lot of this pitching why Ethereum. I think the most set of key advantages here is that it is a global settlement layer. There's definitely a first mover advantage. It's been live for 7 years, right? There's been a lot of hacks that people have tried for the base network, the base client, that have not been successful. There have been obviously hacks in the applications that still operate the network still operated as designed. So I think it's robust. I think a lot of other Ethereum killers, quote unquote, have learned quite a bit from it. But a lot of the other companies that work on EVM compatible public chains, such as layer twos, and you can think about Polygon, Arbitrum, Optimism, Palm, BSC, all of these are smaller networks that inherit the security of this layer one network. Ethereum is immutable in many ways because there are 15,000 plus nodes out there that are run across the world by different types of decentralized parties. And the ecosystem has started to deploy a lot of really interesting applications that are very composable. And so I'll talk about this in a later slide, but effectively, if you have the ability to make value out of ETH, which is kind of your digital oil, right? You need this to actually run your applications. Then the applications themselves also have a lot of different interesting implications, right? You have stable coins, which allow you to trade and stake. Then you have other DeFi protocols that involve something like borrowing, something like securitization and lending. And so now you have formations of margin trading. There's also collateralization that's used for stable coins. There's kind of this whole DeFi economy that has formed because of these building blocks. And it's not just open APIs where you can, ping a bank and hopefully get a response if you're authenticated. These are real smart contracts that you can directly interact with your own, account, which is fairly open. There's also more resolved concerns. A lot of people built other layer ones like Solana and Cardano and AVAX, right? All of these are built because they were addressing scalability or privacy concerns or energy efficiency. And I think a lot of these are addressed in the roadmap, and we'll have a few slides about that. So in general, when people ask about adoption, it is specifically for the NFT space, but also more broadly in terms of liquidity, a leader. There are hundreds and thousands of assets with 400,000 plus developers, and I'm pretty sure it has grown massively since the pandemic started. A lot of people are learning Solidity, learning how to code, learning how to implement their own tokens and their own contracts, and leveraging the fact that all of this is open source, right? Anyone can look at the code that's available on Etherscan for any of the contracts that are out there. And in fact, the licensing agreement within Ethereum is such that you have to open source your code before you actually leverage it. So after you launch it, you actually have to open source it because it is under a GPL license. So even though it's open, even though people want to make money off of the code that they create, it's kind of the new Wild West out here because you have to open source that code before you can even make money on these protocols. There's not much of patenting some type of code. In the old days, you can kind of surround your whichever software with protections. Here in the blockchain space, it's very much, hey, I've built this. Let's try to break it, and then let's open source it and see who's going to adopt it. So a lot of new networks that are created. It's almost like open source forums versus Facebook, right? Facebook has a lot of growing users or maybe even shrinking users now. But the fact is that the code itself for the features are all available for people to see. A lot of other statistics, feel free to read through these. You can actually go to I Love the Block. They have a lot of metrics, and feel free to use this as a good source of all of the things that are happening on Ethereum, on Bitcoin, on different types of layer 2 solutions. So happy to share this with people that are interested. These are just drawing different charts of adoption based on a lot of things that you can get into, but I will not get into that right now. Some more activity summarized for those who are interested in NFTs. The sales have been mostly on Ethereum, right? All of your CryptoPunks, all of the things that are selling on OpenSea are basically on Ethereum. It settles $300 billion worth of value on a monthly basis over other types of blockchains out there. And Ethereum itself has become institutional grade. There's a lot more locked in these DeFi projects than before. I think, I believe in 2021, it settled 12 trillion or so around cryptocurrencies. And that's because all of these are growing quite quickly. And as the value grows, the metrics also grow. There's also hundreds of thousands of daily active addresses that are being created and used on the network. And so all these concurrent users are actually interacting in real time. And maybe you've created your own wallet and you've bought some crypto and you're kind of interacting with the network. This is kind of one of the strengths of these blockchain networks are concurrent users. You can have, millions of users that are created, and then once they interact with the network, it's kind of a separate ecosystem. So imagine, Facebook being able to create users on any network and then being able to connect to their own, types of APIs afterwards. There's also layer 2 scaling types of solutions that are being created, and also a global community of different developers that are really expanding very quickly. A lot of companies that are being funded by VCs, and it's definitely a very fast-paced growing space. We find that when you look at multiple types of blockchains, people usually ask about the decentralization of it, like how secure is this, how resilient is this in terms of replication of nodes, as well as in terms of the number of validators. And so Ethereum has the most number of nodes and validators out there. It is pretty resilient in terms of, if somebody wanted to change the database, they would have to pay a lot of money to convince 51% of all of these validators to kind of connect to them and see that as the version of truth. Other blockchain networks that are out there are a little bit smaller or have trusted validators or have a subset of them based on the token that they've created. And so there are fewer nodes that can be secured. You can convince different validators to do things. There's probably some ways to do some, some type of collusion if needed for kind of known validators.
Hey, Clemens, question.
Yes.
How does this match up against something like Bitcoin nodes? Because I'm not sure that falls into the category you just described with other blockchain networks. But since our students are looking at both, maybe you could speak to how those compare.
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin has quite a few, I don't even know what their latest node count is, but I can tell you.
I was going to say, when we look at a couple different spots online, right, that report it or try to report it. They had about the 15,000 range a couple weeks ago. But again, it's a lot harder, I think, to track some of those active node networks on Bitcoin. And maybe that's a lot easier to do on Ethereum.
Don't think it's true in terms of ease. I mean, so Bitcoin is good for a single purpose, which is you have a value, a native value, which is Bitcoin. And within that value, the traceability of it follows something called the unspent transaction output model, which means that you can only receive Bitcoin if somebody else gives it to you, or you've mined it and that was a reward. And so within the Ethereum world, the ETH itself has value, but it's also used to secure the network for the computer programs that sit on top of it. So Ethereum is a global computer where every transaction you send is an instruction that gets processed. Bitcoin is a global ledger where you're just telling the ledger, I'm able to move my amount to someone else. And that's pretty much it. I mean, there's some metadata that you can kind of squeeze in there for additional types of complicated or kind of simplified types of smart contracts, but it's more or less confirming that you are the one that owns it, you have the private key to send it, and you are able to send that transaction to another address. And so there's kind of more layers in Ethereum. And so I don't know if
that clarification was really good. So the statement of it's the most decentralized and resilient is out of all smart contract platforms that we can. Correct. Yeah. Okay. That is really good clarification for everybody. Thank you.
Yeah. I wouldn't get hung up on the decentralization part for some parts of this. I mean, I would just say that Solidity and the creation of kind of this Ethereum virtual machine code rivals kind of the Java virtual machine code that's out there. And because it's being confirmed and used and live across the network, makes the contracts, the applications that you write a little bit easier. It's almost like, oh, well, I've written something, if the whole internet has a bunch of HTML and CSS out there, and I could just view the source and render whatever, then I can actually create my own website off of copying somebody else's website, right? So I think it's compare that to applications like smart contracts. All of these smart contracts are available for anyone to view. You can just view the source, view the thing through a browser, and then you can build your own applications, copying or leveraging some of these standards that are already out there.
Great, thank you.
No problem. So I mentioned this briefly. There are a lot of composability elements to this, and all of the developers that have been building on it kind of leverage these elements. In some ways, they also take them for granted. But the idea is it's a bit of a story. So when you start off, you had all these ICOs, right? So the ICOs were initial coin offerings. People wanted to use the Ethereum network like a venture capital network, like a VC investment network. Essentially, ETH could be used to directly fund projects, and then those projects could then have their own tokens that make money. And therefore, I've kind of staked my tokens with this new token and converted it into a ERC20 token. And so that was interesting at first, kind of showed that you can use this as an investment banking platform or kind of an investment platform, but it got so much more complicated and so much more sophisticated as time went on. So this is around 2017, 2018. Once ICOs boomed and looked a lot like Ponzi schemes, because most of them were basically Ponzi schemes, or they just had a website and a white paper and an address and told people to send their ETH over. It became clear that it was very volatile. People started exiting the platform and basically took that fundraise as a way to give themselves time to build. And so the stable coins that were created afterwards were to kind of counter what has happened in the public volatility space. We needed stable coins in order for traders to be safe with their money, to be safe with their investments, to also stay within the ecosystem. And so the advent of these stable coins is a big part of the evolution. From there, the new pattern that was created. So I started, experimenting with building decentralized exchanges back in 2017, 2018. And the concept that we tried to build, for those who don't know how exchanges work, a centralized exchange is a order book method. So you have buy side and sell side, and you basically match your bid and your ask together. And maybe they're partial fills, but you're more or less moving the market within your order book formation. And so when you try to rebuild order books in a decentralized fashion, you wind up spending a lot of money on unnecessary transactions. You're doing a lot of partial trades. You're kind of matching in these partial things. And so what you wind up building is something similar to what we have now today, which is called an automatic market maker. And so an automatic market maker is essentially a pool of two types of tokens. And those two types of tokens are varying in percentage and actually relate in pricing based on those token pools. And so these token pools are saved, they're locked in escrow, you can contribute to them. And the reason why I bring it up is this is where margin trading comes into play. So if you wanted to margin trade, if I wanted to borrow in order to do some trades, there are contracts out there like Compound and Aave where you can borrow funds. And within those funds, you have to repay. So you basically have a loan that you can take out with these transactions. And then within these loans, you can start to connect them with other types of DeFi protocols. And so early days, you created just simple one token to another for swapping. And now you have things like staking where I can contribute like a USDC type of stablecoin and receive actual return on investment. There are real APYs that have stabilized within the space across multiple protocols. From there, a lot of people thought about not just lending and borrowing, but also looked at asset management. So how can I recreate kind of like blue chip indices across multiple tokens that exist? And again, there's thousands of tokens, tens of thousands of tokens out there. They were thinking about arbitrage. How can I move between different markets and take advantage of liquidity across markets? And then something called DEXs came out. So decentralized exchanges and aggregators are a few different pieces. So I mentioned that automatic market making pool, which has, let's say my token Clemcoin with some USDC or some ETH. And so that pool itself represents a pair. And if I wanted to make a swap between my Clem coin and some other coin, if I have enough of these pools out there, then the aggregator is essentially sending a transaction, hopping across those pools so I can get the best price. And so this is where you build liquidity for your actual tokens. So if I were to create my new token, Clemcoin, what I would do is I would contribute the tokens that I created, Clemcoin, into a pool with ETH. And then if I wanted to swap my Clemcoin now to USDC, I can always jump between Clemcoin to ETH, ETH to USDC, and do 2 hops and 2 transactions. And I will be able to actually convert my Clemcoin to USDC without actually owning any USDC. And so this is what swapping does with decentralized exchanges. So Uniswap was the first one that came out in 2018, 2019, and effectively created all these pools out there so that you can hop between them. And now you have an infinite number of possibilities for optimizing your best price. So how can I get the best price for swapping my Clemcoin for, like Polygon Matic? It would probably be hops through multiple types of, and that's why they're called aggregators, because I'm aggregating across pools and I'm getting the best price across all of them. Right now, the latest trend is to do this across multiple chains. So Ethereum is one chain that has its own liquidity. There are other chains out there that have also Uniswap clones, even Solana and Cardano have their own version of Uniswap out there. And so all of these aggregators, and the reason why this is super cool is now I do not need to just interact with a single contract that's centralized for pricing. Now I have many, many, many pools out there that I can use for swapping. Okay, and then the last thing is digital collectibles. So NFTs are being launched everywhere. I think in the latest, they're being used much more for marketing and much more for large brands with a lot of intellectual property. And so these large intellectual property brands are pretty much launching NFTs for fan engagement. And I have a whole section about how that has come to be. But within Consensus, we helped launch Palm, which did 10,000 NFT drops for Damien Hirst, as well as the latest Warner Brothers drop for the Matrix Revolutions, as well as the Revelation. I forget which one the latest Matrix was, but as well as the Warner Brothers for Space Jam, I believe. So that's all on the Palm network, powered by our tech. I think NFTs are also easy to connect for a lot of Web2 platforms. So Twitter has released Ethereum NFTs, or be able to showcase your profile page as an NFT, connecting your wallet to it. It's kind of another identity layer. TikTok has created a bunch of NFT collections that you can buy on Immutable X, for example. Reddit and some subreddits have some NFTs already embedded. They're looking at ways to also have some currency in that space as well. So a lot of exciting things are happening, combining Web 2 and quote unquote Web 3. I have other sites here, but I think I'm pretty much up on my wanted time to talk about Ethereum. There are ways to scale. It's very complicated, but effectively, the best way to compare this is if you look at your credit card settlement, it is your layer 2, which means that I want to pay for goods and services. The best way to do it is not by using my debit card in this instance, but using a credit card network. The credit card network acts as a instantaneous settlement where the network is fast enough to confirm speeds. And then the data about that network is placed onto my bank, and then I can pay off that bank loan separately. And so when you think about layer 1s and layer 2s, the layer 2 is the settlement network for real-time transactions that are much faster. And then your layer 1, in this sense, is a effectively connection to the central bank, where you're doing some type of bank to bank reconciliation and so it's a protocol settlement layer rather than an actual user to user settlement layer. And all of these create different networks and different pockets of liquidity, but there are ways to push that together. But effectively, you're achieving higher transactions throughput because you are splitting up your number of users for different types of industries, and then hopefully those types of industries can kind of settle faster for whichever they optimize on. Like maybe it's real-time retail payments, like with MasterCard, Visa, that type of stuff, or it's much more about, oh, I want to buy NFTs and I want to make them cheap and have them with a low carbon footprint, and so therefore that is my dedicated layer 2. Okay, things are happening. There's privacy involved as well. We can talk about this a different time, but I think I've convinced you that Ethereum's cool and the blockchain space is super cool. Okay, so how do you get started with your hackathon, and how do you kind of think through all of this? There are getting started pages all over the place. I have one here for Consensus Developer Portal, which gives you a bunch of starting instructions. I can share that if people are interested. And I'll share this all in the Discord as well. There's a quick start guide. There's even an ultimate Ethereum survival guide for the hackathon. And this is just how do you form teams? How do you talk to different parties? There are subsections here around what it takes to win. There are examples out there. There's tools, knowledge bases. There's pre-hackathon things to set up your network, to set up your VS Code or whatever you're using to make sure your kind of DevOps is up to speed and you know how to run sample code out there, run it on Ganache, run it on your local machine. And then how do you coordinate across multiple team members? It's much easier in person, but creating kind of recurring meetings with all of your team members, making sure that you understand what tasks have to be done in order to get to the final run. So there's some project management in there as well. It's important to look at previous winners. I gave this presentation last year and I noted Gitcoin as a great one. There is a much more recent one, which is around ETH Denver. And so if you go to ETH Denver's site, you can actually see all of the hackathon.
Do they have in-person and
types
remote
of
options?
Sorry?
Does ETH Denver have in-person and remote options, or is it only in person?
No. So ETH Denver already passed. There were a few remote options live. There was a metaverse version where you can walk around and talk to different booths that were also virtual. And then there's also pure streaming just off of Twitch. You can watch all the events. And that right now there was an in-person hackathon. And right now there's an ongoing virtual hackathon that will last for the rest of the month as well. And you can see all the submissions under this is an in-person hackathon submission. And I believe there's an ETH Denver virtual hackathon submission. Yeah. So this one has, you can submit your builds here as well. So if you want to submit builds to both, then that's pretty fun too. But you can see what people are submitting, different hackathons and how they do.
But the winners were already announced for like in-person ETH Denver, right?
Correct. We wrote a blog post about it. Check out the winning. It's like you knew what I was going to say. So I was there, hanging out with Vitalik. That's kind of cool. So the one that I wanted to point out was Dust Sweeper, because he was an ex-consensus person as well. And so Dust Sweeper, and this is just an example of what it takes to win, right? They use Ethereum, also have a connection to Chainlink, and you can look at their demo video, which links to their mirror post. So within the mirror post, it describes what their application does pretty simply. Here it shows that there's a demo video that they put onto YouTube. They created a Twitter account for this particular one. It's essentially one diagram that shows, if you have the Dust Sweeper concept is effectively taking your, airdropped whichever types of dust out there, meaning really small amounts of different tokens that you may have received. And they have created a market taker bot that pretty much can do this at a low gas cost, even though they're all on Ethereum. And so all the gas cost is taken on by the bot, but there are ways to govern that whole thing. So it's a fun little app that you can take a look at. They did polls, how much do people have less than $400 sitting in a wallet? A lot of people do this and they would use it. They created user stories, they wrote them all done. And then they created a solution where they can demo the solution. And it was fairly simple. They did this within a week, and they gave future development. So I think this is a good outline of who contributed, there are inspirations that you can copy from saying, oh, well, we really like the way CowSwap and Uniswap did this. And so we created this as a way to, forking their code, talking about their things. And so I think it's a very, very interesting way to move this forward. And they also received a bunch of dust token fundraising. So they raised 430K very quickly somehow. And so now they have this money to build out this project by 269 backers. Now, for those who don't know Mirror, it's a really fascinating blogging platform that does so much more. So every blog post is an NFT effectively, and you can embed everything within crypto within your blog post. So any type of fundraising, this is all with crowdfunding. It's just a module that you embed, and you more or less can raise funds for people who read Mirror. And the cool thing about the way Mirror launched is there's something called rat race in Mirror. So in order for you to get a free Mirror account, you have to have enough followers in order to do it. And so if you are, and maybe they got rid of the rat race, which was interesting. But when it first started, effectively, you had to purchase enough of this right token. And then within the right token, you can only launch if you were able to win a vote across, I believe it was, whoever was competing for the race. And so it's very cool that it's free now, because now I can totally just sign my wallet and create my own. So maybe I'll do that. But it was for about 6 months. There were a lot of right token costs. And anyway, I think it's a great platform for people to create their own content and then own that particular content. So you would own your unique NFT that represents your blog post. Cool. Okay, so definitely look at all of these fun, awesome hackathons out there, as well as submissions. And I gave you a few ideas of what that could look like. Yeah, so I just mentioned here a winning hackathon like Dust Sweeper, which won, had a clear purpose, 1 to 2 diagrams talking through what the smart contracts do, a quick video that you can watch. I think the demo video is 4 minutes or so, but it shows Corbin talking through it. There's ads.
Hey, Clemens, Mary had a question real quick in the chat.
Yeah, so this whole thing took a week. It was a week long to develop the application. It was a week-long hackathon. So they formed their team in the beginning of the week, and then they built it within a week. I think the virtual one, so a lot of people use hackathons as kind of springing off points for fundraising. And so if you have a really good idea, looks like an extension of another idea, then you may, or you have your own company that has started a fun idea, then you may use the hackathon as a jumping off point. So some of these people may have been working on it for longer and just submitted it. But the thing about hackathons is usually the IP for the hackathon is open source. So if you did not intend to open source your idea while you were fundraising elsewhere, then people usually don't do hackathons. But yeah, if you've had an idea for a while and you wanted to contribute it, this is kind of the place to do it. Yes, lots of great hackathons out there. Definitely read and watch and see what people have built already, because I don't know, well, most of the judges probably don't know all of the hackathon winners out there. So you could very easily look through and find inspiration and make it your own. And I think that most people that build websites, for example, look at other websites and say, hey, I think this is a great website. I'm going to build something similar. And you learn a lot in the process. So I don't think it's kind of cheapening it, but definitely learn from other projects that have been completed and build on top of projects that are already out there. So if it's a hackathon that was never extended, then it's probably an interesting science project to extend it. Cool. And through ETH Global also has a bunch of hackathons. I like Dora Hacks a lot more. A lot more people have been using this as their main way of submitting bounties, for example, submitting grants, and then providing hackathons. So that seems to be my new source of truth. There are guides to get started. This is the guide that we have within our consensus.net/developers. Feel free to read through those. For organizing the hackathon team, Usually it's hard to agree on solving the same problem and finishing the project on time. So these are things that you should discuss with your team before you join a team and make sure that the idea evolves with each other. There's no bureaucracy, it's just kind of hacking and learning. And then other topics that you can think about is really, how do I break down the schedule? How do I make sure that my design statement solves my problem? Can I prototype a storyboard out there so that the narrative makes sense, so that people that are following and aren't really deep in the weeds can say, oh, this is useful because it connects to my problem too. Can you time box different tasks, right? Very much project management 101. And can you do a regular scheduled check-in every 2 or 3 days or once a day as needed? And then people usually use Google Docs or Google Slides for their presentation. Keep it under 4 or 5 slides, I guess. Try to make it more about the demo if that's kind of the purpose of your hackathon. If you want to get started, these are just kind of public sites out there. I love Solidity because it is open source and a lot of people can just go in and see code, right? All of these are open kind of regular coding patterns that you might know about. There's even applications of how they work. So ERC 721 is code for your NFTs. And so this is all just open source NFT stuff out there. All these functions are available and a part of it. If you wanted to do additional, things like multi-call or multi-delegated call, different types of tests. So this is another Solidity by example, just for fun. And then if you wanted to deploy, there's also leveraging Etherscan by itself. So if you see a really fun dApp out there that you like, you can just explore the dApps that are live today. So if I wanted to, for example, see how meme token works, I can look at their meme token code and directly review it. So if I look at their contracts, I can view their read contract. Within their contract, where is their contract? There it is. So within their contract, this is the contract that they have issued. It's created by this address. And then you should be able to see the contract code over here. I love this Sol to UML. You can actually view all of the functions that have been written for the contract and what they've specifically built for their code and how they've extended the ERC 721 token, for example. So this is a NFT marketplace, this meme token. They started off with this basic set of functions. They extended it for additional metadata. They then used more and more extensions, built out their own Eternal DB library. This is a standard proxy contract. So it's an easy way to kind of look through. This is a registry of all the different NFTs that are created with different voting, challenging. And so it's easy to read through the code quickly because you see where the tokens are, what they're made out of, what their functions are. And this is the meme token that inherits your registry that uses other types of transactions and functions. Cool. So once you get familiar with this, this will be kind of second nature to see what different programs do just by either looking through the code or doing the simplified version of it, which is converting it to a UML diagram by looking through the code. But like I said, it's really cool because it's all out there and free and open. Like if you wanted to look at a website, you just look at the source code. If you wanted to look at smart contracts, you kind of just use Etherscan and you'll be able to view the code for what's out there. Great. I think, oh, and if you are into games, that we just released, this is an experiment with different Unity libraries. So Unity is a tool for gaming, and this is written by one of our consensus friends. So here you can see how you can connect your MetaMask within this Made with Unity toolbox and be able to issue NFTs directly. So you can mint NFTs to your MetaMask wallet if that's interesting to you. And this connects to the Unity toolbox. Two other things I mentioned for those that are non-technical. you can actually do something called eth.build. And it's similar to how I was showing the UML diagrams. This is a visual way as an educational sandbox to understand how Web3 works. And so if I just start with a build, I could load, and this is just a sandbox function, but it connects to testnet, and I can actually write my code into here and it'll come together. And so those who are interested in different functions, like if you use this click button, this is an actual click button that you would put, and this would create a key pair, takes your private key, generates your public key. It kind of shows you how private public key works with creating addresses. And all of these functions are drag and drop. So you can actually very similarly recreate your code. This is kind of for a wallet. So how do you sign your keys, right? This is your private key message. How does that convert into an encrypted string? How do you decrypt it? So these are all just functions that are available. So if people are coding, kind of trying to visualize how their code works, this is the best way to do it. You can figure out where things like this is the string of your signed message, for example, right? This is connected to signatures over here. So lots of cool stuff and lots of cool examples. I think there's things that you can load. Where's your load components? But I've seen this as a starting point for hackathons, or as at least for educational purposes, just to understand how different functions work, and you can just kind of push things around. So that was a hash function. I think I was showing the key pair function. If you want to look at encryption functions, or they're all available with videos. So here, like a transaction one, how do I send value from one to another? This is a pre-made build that Austin put together. And so you can see I have a blockchain. The blockchain itself has transactions. The transactions have objects. You can watch different signatures. So really interactive, really easy. And so if you click different buttons here, it starts the signature, goes to the transaction, you get a send transaction function. So really cool way of understanding all the components of a blockchain plus interactions with wallets. Okay. They also have a Scaffold ETH GitHub and a demo of how he builds different projects with it. So he starts off with this ETH builder and then kind of moves forward with it. So feel free to leverage any of these. And thinking about this is something that we did internally just because we have to eat our own dog food at Consensus. And so these are Consensus made t-shirts or kind of hoodies that we built within Decentralized. And we handed them out to all of our employees. And so if you wanted to design your own Decentraland wearable, there's actually a pretty easy way to do it. You can just go through their code, look at 3D modeling, create your own, design on top of a pre-made wearable. And it would be a really fun hackathon project because you can then hand it out to all the students. And so you just have to create a web page to redeem the wearables, maybe do some security check to make sure it's coming from logged in, email address. You receive an email that says I can confirm and receive it. You connect your wallet, MetaMask wallet to it, and then you can redeem this NFT that is your t-shirt. And so that could be a fun project. You would then have a metaverse with kind of little logos in there. So you have some metaverse t-shirts or sweatshirts. Cool. Hopefully this was the most interesting section of getting started. Any questions? There's a lot of great content out there. It's like the early days of building websites, except they are smart contracts and they are applications that work with smart contracts. So everything is open source.
I just have a comment, Clemens. I can't believe how much has changed in a year, right? So you did this for us last year. So much of this is becoming so much easier for developers. I'm really blown away. And I love the examples from the previous hackathons. That's really going to inspire our students. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. I'm a big
But
fan.
I got to say, some of this is making me think I don't need to teach anymore. I can just go out there. I love the thing you just walked us through on how transactions process. Chance, I think, unmuted and had something to share.
Yeah, are there any consensus specific resources that we've got access to for the hackathon? Like, I don't know, like free and fair accounts or anything?
Yeah, that's in the next section.
Okay,
I got a
cool.
whole section just shilling consensus stuff.
Sweet. Okay, cool. I'll let you go.
Anything else? Yeah, I mean, you're right that Mary, I mean, it's really grown quickly. And even from my side, and I know a lot of the stuff, but it gets more and more interesting every day with the new patterns that are being created with, especially with incentive mechanisms for joining now that it's become mainstream, now that there's institutional interest, now that DAOs, I don't know if you know about the Constitution DAO and kind of how it kicked off with fundraising to buy the Constitution off of a Sotheby's auction. But effectively, they see it as a new way for fundraising. Within 48 hours, raising $40 million is pretty impressive. So a lot of really interesting patterns that are getting into the broader institutional investing space. And especially now with Ukraine DAO raised a bunch of money. They're doing an airdrop. I think this was announced a few hours ago that Ukraine DAO is doing an airdrop for the donators. So super interesting. Okay, so in terms of products, so I mentioned this in the beginning, we within Consensus have a lot of different components that we can help you guys with for your developer journey. We've effectively built this from our experience working with different enterprises. So I'll have a whole section talking about enterprise use cases and use case design. But when we worked with these large companies, they wanted to make Ethereum much more enterprise focused. They wanted a private network. So they wanted an intranet instead of an internet, right? They wanted things to look a lot like the vendors that they're used to working with. And so we did a lot of work to make it fit into enterprises. At the end of the day, a lot of these components in the public are much more useful because the assets that you create have more value in liquidity, very similar to, if you reduced your blogging platform to just writers that are writing for pay, that is different than crowdsourcing all of the written material across multiple blogs, right? Blogs are open. Some of these paywalls that are being created in enterprises are closed. And so all the digital assets that we're creating seem to be a little bit more closed for enterprises. And I think they're starting to realize that in the past few years. It is much harder to connect your digital asset when it is on an island than if you've published it for people to discover. And so the applications that we've created are to make the developer process a lot easier, both for regular consumers, regular developers, as well as for kind of the enterprise space. And so we've built a lot of things that I think are enterprise grade and can be useful if you so wish to build with our material. When we start with enterprise projects, we have a whole professional services consulting team that does this on a daily basis and kind of in parallel with a lot of different projects. I'm a solution architect, so I design a lot of these solutions and recommend different components that we've built already. So the first thing is usually setting up your developer experience. So making sure that your base setup and configuration can work within teams, within multiple teams, across multiple different types of, requirements, like enterprise requirements where, you can't connect to the internet in most of the cases, right? There's a bunch of firewalls that are involved. So we have documentation for that and kind of ways to make it more appealing for innovation groups that might be behind these strict enterprise agreements. From there, there's two layers that you have to think about. The first is the website application layer. And so Web3 in the back end are all these smart contracts. They're all open source. They're all interoperable, right? If you have inherited the right functions, then you should be able to read the token and view different reporting data about the token. What usually happens is that people get hung on building websites because that's what people know. You know how to build a website that showcases your business, or maybe it's a social networking website. And then people ask, well, how can I make this website more Web3 extensible? How do I attach my existing user base to my new token? How do I multiply my value by issuing new tokens and things like that? And so the reason why I bring this up is the application layer is usually not Web3 at all. Like it's actually just using regular React.js or NPM libraries, and you're really just building connectors to existing open source libraries that are out there. And I think that's the best way to look at this if you don't want to. It's kind of like the early days of mashups. So early days of Web 2 development, maybe even Web 1 turning into Web 2, was because everyone created their own username, password, sign up, right? I'm able to create an account onto one website. Let's say it's Instagram, and I can contribute my content, which are my photos and videos, to Instagram. Then from there, a mashup would be taking the user information and the created content from one website and combining it and mashing it up with another. And so this was the early day. And when Facebook did this at first, it was their app store kind of using their identity as a base and then expanding it from there. And in the Web3 world, I think there are similar things happening where the connections to all of these DeFi protocols are all open, right? You can pretty much find the contracts, interact with them, use the SDKs that are available across the different sites that have built them, and see what you can do with it. You can create loans, you can create a lot of different values, you can create your own tokens as needed. But this sits separately, your website, your application sits separately from where you deploy it. There is what we call the multi-chain world out there today. There's a lot of different choices in where you deploy your tokens. So if you treat yourself like a creator, then you have options in where you deploy your videos. You can put it onto YouTube, onto TikTok, onto Reels, onto whatever, right? And onto Vimeo. And so all of these are networks, and think about your content as having the power. So the applications now, and the applications that are being built are being redeployed to multiple areas to leverage where quote unquote liquidity sits. In the Web 2 days right now, you have a lot of liquidity in views and likes and posts and kind of reshares and all those things. I think in the Web 3 world, the liquidity is real value of tokens, and those tokens can usually only exist in one area, but will get replicated and formed in other areas. And so that's kind of the future, is not just building the application from like a Web 2 perspective, but thinking about where you deploy your tokens to different networks. And so after you build the purpose of your application, which could be like an NFT marketplace or something similar to that, then you can choose to deploy your NFTs to just one network like Palm, or on Ethereum, or on Polygon, or on any of those other networks, depending on where you think your customers will buy them from. Finally, you think about your QA of the product, which is any smart contract that you write should be reviewed by a diligence team with best practices to prevent any type of hacking. And then finally, connect your wallet to that network. And you can go through MetaMask. We have a MetaMask institutional product as well. And all of these are good ways of getting started. Okay, within the products, right, when you're building the old days, and this is 4 years ago, the old days, you would have to run your own node. You would actually have to participate in the network from a network level perspective. Nowadays, it's so much cheaper. Everything is just an API call. So it's converting kind of the difficulties of running infrastructure and being a participant on every single layer by owning tokens, and then committing tokens for staking and all this other stuff. Now it's just, I'm participating from a application developer perspective, and you're effectively just using APIs. And so the SDKs are fairly easy. It's really just adding a few lines of code that call a few APIs, and then you will have your Web3 enabled application. So your applications can leverage some of the things that we've built within Infura. This is our managed service provider. And it is scaled at billions of API calls per day. I mean, we support a bunch of applications live on the network, and they don't just connect to Ethereum, they connect to other L2s. So you can go to Polygon, Optimism, Arbitrum, Palm, any of EVM compatible chain out there. It also connects IPFS, which is kind of like a global storage area that references by the content hash. And by that, I mean, you can upload it to like GitHub, but instead of, finding your GitHub based on your username and account and kind of project you've created, you find your GitHub off of the hash of the entire contents of the GitHub. And so the reason why that's cool is, now I can create an NFT, and the NFT and where it sits in this IPFS, URL is now guaranteed to not change, because if you change the image, then it points to a different URL. So that's kind of the reason why IPFS was created, and Filecoin as well. Filecoin is another way of storing different types of files using their Filecoin fill to do a share to earn type of model. But these multiple ideas is just to decentralize as much as possible so that everybody can run and store your data with the incentives of spending that infrastructure to do so. Other features, and this is much more for enterprise, is something called Infura Transactions, or ITX. ITX has something called a gas tank management. So if you are an enterprise and you can't own ETH in your treasury because it's a volatile asset and you have to get a bunch of sign off, we created something called a gas management or transaction management type of a system. And so this system allows us to abstract away the cost of ETH using gas. And so we top up your fiat currency. So let's say you want to spend $1,000 on running your network, then we will pay for all of the gas up to those transactions. And we basically allow different enterprises to access the Ethereum network through this kind of gas management system. Okay, and we have essential APIs. I think this is kind of straightforward. You pretty much insert some of your code into your existing Web2 application, and it just works because we take care of all the heavy lifting. And if you need to scale, we've done this already. It's kind of live, so we can help you scale as needed across multiple endpoints. I mentioned before that we build a lot for enterprise. And so within the enterprise space, a lot has to do with kind of guaranteed transaction processing. And if your transaction fails, you have to retry as needed. And so a lot of this tech is within exchanges today. So if you look at Coinbase or Gemini, they have embedded this technology into their transaction processing at high speeds. We have built it out as core components for enterprise blockchain solutions. And these are kind of the functions that we've written out. Most people that build in the enterprise world will probably think about these problems. And we've solved them about 3 years ago. So we provide this as a service for people to use. If you want to use Codify Orchestrate, and I think this is overkill for a hackathon, but if you want to use it, there are available accounts that we can create for you, and you can experiment with the APIs that we've written for this. But effectively what it does is you install on your business application this Orchestrate SDK, and then on top of your blockchain layer, you also have an Orchestrate SDK, and you're able to do kind of event streaming, you're able to register contracts as needed, you're able to take care of deployments like gas and nonce and resetting of nonce as needed, different types of signatures for kind of the multi-party compute that you may have on your backend. And then you just expose microservices to the business application, so you're kind of abstracting all of this away. For getting started, it's an NPX account that it's fairly simple to get started. There's also a bunch of Docker types of already pre-built virtual machines for you to use. You can use Kubernetes as well. So if you're into Kubernetes, K8 is available. There's videos and free accounts and trials. So use this NPX Quorum Dev Start to get started. Also a video on how to get started by one of our devs. The other thing I mentioned on the app side is tokenization is usually a main theme. It's always about digital assets because digital assets have value. There's a lot of different types of tokens out there. And when you create your own, you can customize across kind of these areas. So usually you start off by thinking about if you want either a fungible, non-fungible, or a hybrid type of token. You then design a bunch of business workflows. So if I wanted to make this into a supply chain project, then I would have it interact with different existing systems to say, okay, well, when this token hits this particular system or is interacted with this particular system, then it will change some properties, it will evolve in some way. And then you define the roles. So maybe particular, this can be abstracted in another proxy contract, effectively creating these user roles for different types of parties that interact with it. And then you choose the network in which you deploy your contracts and your business logic on top of it. And then you follow the process to release your asset, and you have a complex set of tools. And I can actually full screen.
Can you give an example of like what a hybrid token in this kind of roadmap looks like?
Sure. So it could be a lot of things, but if your invoice is a so let's say I am building which example do I want to use? There's like simple stock examples. Here, if I wanted to build a stock of some sort, a representation of a stock or a synthetic, right, then the ownership of the stock itself could be the owners would be non-fungible because they own the entire company. But then the subset of the shares that could be distributed can be fungible in other ways. And so there are combinations of non-fungible and fungible tokens that you can share in terms of those functions. And maybe this is a little complicated because the way that I see all of these smart contracts are as functions. And so if you think about the contract that I looked at before over here, this particular token contract has all of these different functions that inherit, right? This is an ERC 721 basic contract. And all of these functions for the basic contract over here are the ones that every ERC 721 has, which means that only one owner can have it. There might be kind of back doors to how you build it out, but the events are the same. I can transfer it from one address to another because it is non-fungible and only one person can own it. And so when you look at fungible, the transfer is different because it's more of a purchase, or it's more of a, if I've confirmed that one person has purchased it. And so a hybrid would just be what subset of all of these functions are available and can you build for your particular token. So if you just think about it from a functional perspective, maybe I require to check for an OFAC list before I can sell the contract, for example. Maybe I want to build in some royalty or some other types of methods of partial ownership. Maybe there's 49% ownership. Maybe there's a NFT that I want to shard into 100 pieces, and then I sell those 100 pieces, but I still own the major piece of the artwork. There's just different ways that people have thought about it's fungible and non-fungible, but maybe there's other things that I can add to it that is not just pure business logic, but could be, part of the fundamental piece of the token design.
Thank you.
Cool. Hopefully that wasn't too complicated, but there's.
Yeah, Clemens, I have a question too. If you go back to your suite that you offer enterprises, I'm confused where baseline is. Where is the baseline protocol? Is it touching some of those modules or products that you have?
Yeah, so the baseline protocol is super interesting, run by John Wolpert, who was previously within Consensus. We're still funding a lot of his work. And so baseline is effectively a method to take a subset of reference data and compare it on chain. And so you're not saving your data on chain, you're just saving a comparison of references on chain for any changes. And so it's nuanced because instead of me doing like a registry lookup, so in terms of architecture patterns, I can use something like, let's say I'm using NFTs to get into a Discord channel. What they do is they check, you have signed in with your MetaMask account, they look up your address, and then they look up the NFT, and they see whether or not you have an NFT inside of the smart contract that matches your address. So that's a simple lookup methodology, where I know there's a registry. I know I'm looking for a particular name in that registry. And if it checks out and it's true, then you're allowed in, right? So that's kind of your base mechanism for any type of lookup registry pattern. The baseline pattern is a little bit different because they're not saving the same data. They're saving references to the data in a very condensed way. And so they're saving almost like the Merkle of that data to make sure that it compares. And so it's not exactly that you can do a full lookup. You're just making sure that things haven't changed in terms of the reference. So the baseline protocol is a whole separate group that has been building in such a way to not share the pure data, but just to share references of changes for that data in a simplified fashion. Yeah. Cool. So a little bit different, but at the end of the day, still trying to solve for the same thing, which is we want a zero knowledge proof, or we want to be able to prove that you own something or prove that something has happened or something has changed without actually seeing what your data is or revealing that information.
Clemens, this is Stephen. A quick question for you. Since you're exposed to corporate America, I'm just curious on how nimble corporate America generally is, what their understanding of the Web3 space is, how educated they are. I'm curious about who inside the organizations reaches out to you. Is it marketing or IT or development? And finally, I'd be super curious how you guys interact with the big legal teams and how understanding or compassionate they are in the space, or how ferocious they are.
Yeah, that's a whole nother presentation that I can go into.
Yeah, I understand.
Happy to set up more. Okay, so the short answer is it starts off with the innovation team, right? Innovation teams have remits to do something with this technology. They build out some connectivity with, maybe they build a blockchain working group like I did kind of back in the day. And within that group, they want to experiment with, as well as enable other product lines to embed this technology into what they're responsible for. And so if you look at a big bank and how those corporations are split up, you have to justify your budgets. You have to say, well, this IT team owns this product that already has a roadmap. You know, it's built out for, my book of work is for a year, it's been approved. And now this innovation group wants to give me money to do something different or do something more. The front office gets involved when they see, hey, these alternative assets actually have value. Can we launch our own? Like, what's the thought process behind a bank launching their own bond that can be traded in the public network? And so SocGen is a great example of this. They've been experimenting quite a bit in the past 5-6 years. I believe they are very, very active. Santander as well, they're active within the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. And effectively what they've built are ways to build within the bounds of what they can do and then satisfy kind of the future trajectory without actually breaking their existing systems. And so the reason why I think NFTs are super interesting is if you look at the core banking systems, everything that we've tried to build for enterprises for digital assets already exists in kind of like a silly string spaghetti tech deck type of way. And so the problem of, hey, let's replace our existing internal systems like LoanIQ with a new system that was just built by a startup of 10 people is that there is too much vendor lock-in. And so vendor lock-in is the worst thing that can happen to a big company, because now you're basically paying that company to replace things that already work. And so if you want to avoid replacing something that already works, and again, NFTs are super interesting because there is no existing tech debt for, you know, selling your NFT artwork out to the public and making money off of it, right? That is all new technology. If I wanted to replace the way I trade equities, I'm replacing like literally $500 million worth of tech that I pay for on an annual basis just to support, right? I have the people that I pay for, I have the tech and the vendor licenses, I have all of the applications and reporting that I've done. And so if I wanted to like go up that mountain to replace all that stuff is very, very difficult to do. But with NFTs and with kind of this new market that exists externally, every private banking wealth management provider has thought about, hey, can I make this into a service so that I can actually obtain new high net worth users, or let's say all these crypto millionaires that have come out from nowhere, right? I want them to be in my banking system in some way. And so the latest view of all of this, and it's sometimes with marketing because it is highly connected to influencers, connected to how you can multiply your value, connected to how you can, use this as a method of creating affiliates and linking to different types of parties. I think at the end of the day, though, you're looking at a new network of very rich people and very rich assets that will try to be extracted from by this kind of traditional network. So every pattern that I've seen is, hey, we want to get more crypto people inside of my bank, or hey, we want to deploy something where our asset can be purchased with crypto, and therefore it also raises our value. Because this new space is so crazy, it's created too much new value, and there's less and less reason for that value to just sit in traditional stocks, traditional assets, or even in dollars and inside of banks itself. So the roundabout way of saying, like, it's the conversations with enterprises have been more difficult because they see that as an intermediary, they are definitely being disrupted, and they have to pivot their business model in order to stick around. I may have missed some things for that, but feel free to add them to the chat and I can answer them in a second section as well. Good thing we still have 45 minutes or so, I think. Ish. I'm going to skip over this because I doubt people will directly use this for the hackathon, but I think the interesting model to think about is abstraction of identity. So when you look at the base layer, when you look at trading in tokens on the blockchain itself, they're all just numbers and hashes and kind of things that are jumbled together. When you build these layers above it, and so when you look at orchestrate, you are passing through it different levels of abstraction. This actually shows the address that you want to send it to. When you're looking at codify assets, these are actually the identity tokens that you pass around, tokens being the hash of things that have authentication associated with it. And then on the application layer is where you cross that with your lookup database of, this particular token ID reflects the authentication for your actual Bob and Alice that's in the network. And so identification is such a big part of how you design these things. And when you look at the full tech stack, it's good to understand that each application deals with identifications differently and abstracted differently in order to interact with your ultimate, ledger of a bunch of jumbled up things thrown together, right? A lot of API things, and I think I wrote this last year as well. Personal recommendation is to play around with it if you have time, but there's probably much more to do out there in the public. And so you can build off of a Codify Assets API and make your own, on-chain Carta like we have within Codify Assets. But if you want to do something that's much more on the public space, then pretty much take the regular route of going through hackathons, thinking about which passion projects you have that exist, and then how you can bridge them over into a Web3 world. Or there's a lot out there in terms of hackathon presentations that will probably keep people busy. I have a bunch of design patterns that I can go through next, but open for any questions before I start.
Take it away.
Great. So the next section, I think I can do this within 45 minutes, are about design patterns.
Clemens, I just wanted to tell you, I think you only have 12 minutes left.
Oh, okay. So,
we told our students to 2:30.
Okay, I was not aware of that, but that's okay. I will go at a reasonable pace.
We can just get the high level for sure. That should be great.
Okay, so I think this is important. With the difference between Web 2 and Web 3, Web 2 has centrally controlled servers. Think of Facebook, think of music rights industry. It is usually protected by username, password, plus any multi-factor authentication, which means maybe a device is on the side. You have to maybe you have a separate email address that you kind of confirm to log in. The reason why Web3 is different is that you own your own wallet, you own your own private key if you're using MetaMask, and therefore your view of your ownership is your full portfolio. That also means that there's no stickiness. So Web2 VCs usually look at their growth of users. In the Web3 world, there's mostly just total value locked, which is how much ETH or other tokens are stored in the network. And so the difference is that if I move between different Web3 applications, native Web3 applications, I actually take my money with me. I take my data with me as well. It means that if I, logged in and looked at one service and I didn't like the service, I still own all of the tokens. I have not given up my tokens to another participant until I've actually purchased it with that. So the transactions that I send to this interface, and I have a lot of examples of interfaces of what this looks like, but effectively there is a lack of stickiness because you can jump from one application that does one thing to another application, and you can put your money and redistribute your money without any intermediaries. So with that mirror.xyz account that I was talking about, that NFT is owned by you, and so it can only be edited by you, and therefore any money that's made from it is directly sent to you. And so that's a little bit different from saying, I have a website, I've used Facebook, and my post on Facebook, yes, there's privacy ways for me to extract that data, but they own it, right? They don't have to delete it. With the Web3 world, the tokens that you own are the ones that you've purchased, and you have full control of it and how it gets rendered. And so the reason why that's interesting is because there are a lot of intermediaries, especially for payment processing, right? Plaid was built, right, for bank-to-bank connections with Web2 world for fintech companies. MasterCard and Visa are used a lot for settlement as well. In this world, in DeFi, you just use wallets and you settle your transactions directly on these different networks. And so when you look at it from a digital currency perspective, there is a lot of streamlining that has happened. So the old way of processing any type of transaction between merchants and customers through credit cards and credit card alliances and through multiple bank accounts that might use different real-time gross settlement systems is replaced by a set of wallets, a wallet provider, and a single ledger or multiple ledgers for those wallets. I don't think that this layer replaces everything. I think it's very similar to the kind of electric vehicle world where old gas guzzling cars will continue using this until they don't, until there's kind of a hybrid approach of both, and then you kind of turn full EV. But banks are going to stick around, right? They need that for older generations that believe in kind of that physical locations that are out there, believe in suing somebody, I guess, as well, believe in FDIC insured type of accounts that does not exist in the same way within the digital currency world at the moment. So they're just different ways of settling, but they will have different pockets of money. Okay, I'm going to skip a lot of this stuff. This is useful in terms of patterns. The main thing that people build, and this relates to enterprise, right? When we first started experimenting, we thought about registries. Like, how do I just use this as a distributed database that stores a bunch of shared reference data? So maybe that is a land title registry, right? I want to show that I own the deed for my particular house. And if I wanted to transfer it and get paid in Bitcoin for it, then I should be able to do that. And so there are static registries that are on blockchains that people have built, and therefore it shows that they own a piece of collateral. As you build that further, maybe that registry itself has a little bit more logic. Maybe it requires you to trigger events. Maybe it says, well, you have to have a mortgage payment before you can actually change your land registry title or things like that. Or maybe there's an insurance payout if there's some type of natural disaster that happens. And so you started to add some embedded logic for the triggering of movement of registry or triggering of kind of cost of that particular piece of collateral. Afterwards, there's legal. Now just realized I forgot to answer the legal question from Stephen, but the idea is that under legal, there are shared agreements for every lifecycle event. We have effectively embedded all of the legal agreement clauses to say that it is being published in a particular realm, it is being issued on a specific network. And it could be self-referential as well. So I can issue a smart contract that represents a piece of legal agreement. It could be a recording contract signed by those parties. Maybe it's DocuSign familiar, but it's instead of an email address, it's Ethereum addresses. And those legal agreements that reflect the registry have a dispute resolution because it's still written in a legal fashion. It's just that behind the written legal agreement has code. And so the digitization of clauses becomes a big piece of kind of agreeing on the record keeping, because now you can still maintain the standards of your legal framework for dispute resolution while also having the advantage of looking at the same document, right? This is just purely, hey, let's retrieve and look at the same legal document and let's agree that the accounts that have signed it are the same. Instead of, hey, here's a bunch of emails that I've pulled across multiple, centralized systems, for example. From record keeping, which is static, goes into transactional. And this is where the blockchain becomes a lot more interesting, because now you, instead of having, static registries, you have dynamic registries, which means that I can have fractional ownership of investments. I can change my asset ownership off of any type of payment. From there, the payment side becomes a big deal. So central bank digital currencies have been looked at for quite some time. More importantly, cross-border central bank digital currencies. How do I, if on a domestic layer, everyone agrees on one currency, that doesn't really matter because you have to do a lot of cross-border action. And so what does the FX rate look like across the CBDCs? We've done a bunch of projects on that as well. And what you want to get to is something called delivery versus payment, which is the delivery of the asset changing hands and the payment changing hands on an atomic fashion. Meaning, if I give you a briefcase full of money and then you give me the briefcase full of goods, you can hand it off at the same time. And that would be the agreement. In the financial world, it usually takes 2 + 1, 2 + 2 days, because you have to settle the payment separately as separate transactions from settling the change of ownership of asset. You have to update, your collateral registry. You have to update the CSD. You have to update a bunch of other things before that can happen. And then finally, fundraising always becomes the exchange and integration of exchanges for processing your change of ownership and creating new investment models. And that's why, within the financial world, this becomes, hey, this is a new market, because we can actually do all of these things within the blockchain space, within the digital assets that are created, within, for example, real estate transactions. I can change the collateral ownership. I can digitize the clauses of that piece of real estate. I can pay using not just CBDCs, but many different cryptocurrencies. I know the data of the pricing. I'm able to fundraise to pay for a house that I might not own yet, but then I can do a bunch of really, really interesting things that it kind of expands this further. Enterprise are interested because of tokenization. I think this is cool. So these are just kind of further concepts of the evolution of tokens. And so starting with ICOs, security tokens are known securities that are represented in token form that are traded in a public network. And I think they're interesting here because they actually adhere to a lot of the SEC rules. And so now you can actually create securities as tokens. From there, DeFi, NFTs, and bridges become major conversations. And here is similar to what I mentioned before, but kind of on the left to right scale. Your digitization is really an e-signature on chain that has the proof. Maybe it's some legal negotiation. Maybe there's transparency and auditability of the tokens that you've created. And then fractionalization is where you start to involve more people. So maybe those that own some part of my shares have dividends. And so I can actually, within the embedded logic, create recurring dividends. Maybe I want to project finance a particular house that hasn't been built yet, but I want to raise money for it, or project finance a particular supply chain good, right? I need to raise money for something that isn't delivered until 3 months out because the factories have to build it. So all of these different patterns are really pooling of funds together in order to get to the next asset. Securitization, for example, is taking multiple existing securities, throwing them together in a pool of some sort, and then selling that pool based on what it's ranked at. Funds, portfolios, it's the same thing. It's just grouping of different digital assets together. The last thing that I think brings this all together is a made up term from me and some of my other solution architects called liquidity spanning, which means that if I have assets and I can use them as collateral, then that kind of fills into the rest of the economics that we exist in today, which is everything is borrowed and everything is lended. And so if I have the ability to value my asset, use it as collateral, take my yacht, and my yacht is worth this much, can I borrow on top of it? Then I can take physical assets or any type of assets, start to borrow it with collateral, borrow a bunch of money, and then stay in debt forever, which is what rich people do, right? They take advantage of liquidity spending for the economics to work out. And the one step further is that there's a bunch of networks out there today. And so bridging of liquidity across those networks becomes even more important, because it's like my post I mentioned, if you create video, then you have many options of where you make money off that video. And therefore you need to figure out ways to connect them together or make sure that they are connected for a single asset. Okay, I have 1 minute left. Maybe there's something here that I should mention within that minute. Companies are definitely expanding because of this. I think this kind of grows from the enterprise perspective that Stephen was asking about. There are private stablecoins available. There are central banks experimenting with CBDCs. Payment companies already have it in their balance sheet. Traditional exchanges have built out connectivity around digital assets in multiple layers. NFTs have exploded in demand for high net worth individuals. And the banks have reacted by saying, okay, what type of trends do I have to pay attention to? And how can I internally update my policies for me to get ready for the things that are happening in the public? So at the very base, it's institutional custody and wallet solutions. And then more importantly, it's how do I get this inside of my treasury and how do I manage it properly? So what is my liquidity and collateral management for virtual assets or crypto assets? And then all these other things are if you want to get involved into actually building applications into the layer. Most of the banks are thinking about, well, how do I build my developer community? How do I integrate with my existing systems? How does it align with my existing architecture components? And how do I manage the data that's actually being collected from all these pieces? Okay, I have more time, but I think I may be speaking too much about this, and it's not really helpful in the actual.
We're gonna have you back, because I think you've helped us answer so many questions, like beyond just why Ethereum. That you made a very strong case. Where what to do next. We saw a bunch of robust developer tools, amazing things resources that we can find online, and we will definitely share out. And then it was awesome getting to hear from you and learn just about how mature this space is now and how much, further it has left to go. But as Mary was kind of saying, even beyond a year ago, this has just been such valuable information. I love the perspective of consensus and the knowledge that you guys are having to share with us here. And so this has just been an awesome time. Thank you so much, Clemens. We're going to have to schedule another time just to learn more from you. It's been great.
Yeah, happy to do another hour, and I can walk through the rest of the presentation, which I think is less about the hackathon, more about just cool things that we've been working on.
Cool. Yeah, when you turn the recorder off, I'm going to ask you something, Clemens.
Okay, sure.